good thing that, well, echo, echo, echo. That's a little, okay, thank you. I only need to hear myself once, not 5 times. Probably you guys too, you only want to hear me once, not 5 times. This one's going to be audience participation. Okay? So you're going to all have to help me, because if this is applying the self-study tools that we talked about yesterday, I've already done this more than once. But if I'm trying to give the tools to you, me using them doesn't help you, does it? What was the first slide yesterday? It said, if I tell you, you will not know, what's the rest of it? You will merely have been told. All right? So we don't want anyone to merely have been told. When you leave here, what we want is that anything that you don't remember clearly, you can figure out on your own. Anything that you come across new, you will have the tools to figure out on your own. So we're going to take 3 of the amendments and apply these self-study tools that we talked about yesterday. So how do you know something? How do you learn something? The first thing you have to do is you have to read. And not only the document or the passage that you're trying to understand, but if you need history or surrounding circumstances or something, don't read anything that's been written about it recently, because you're going to be getting stuff that's slanted. Go to the original sources, stuff that was published at the time, and read both sides. One of the things that came out at the same time as the Constitution was published and sent out to the states was the Federalist Papers, which explained in great detail how the new constitutional system was supposed to work. But there also came out at that time a group of papers now known as the Anti-Federalist Papers, which explained in great detail all the ways they foresaw this new structure outgrowing the limits placed on it. And while the Federalist Papers were very clear in how the Constitution was supposed to work, the Anti-Federalist Papers just about built a roadmap for everything that was going to go wrong. So if you're trying to see how the Constitution has been misused and misapplied, the Anti-Federalist Papers are a really good resource for that. So once you've got the original sources, then you think. There is stuff between your ears that does more than just take up space in your skull. It's given to you by God, and it allows you to ponder, to consider, to take things out and look at them and think, well, what if this? Or, I'm not sure about that. Think about it. Think about things that you don't want to think about. Think about things that you think are dumb. Think about things that you think are too hard for you to think about. Think about them all and compare them with the thing that you're trying to figure out. Then you take all of those thoughts and the work that you've done, and you use the principles behind an analysis of the Constitution, and you evaluate. And this isn't just for the Constitution, this is for anything that you're trying to understand. Evaluate it in accordance with principles. So let's start with the 9th Amendment, which says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So just to start, what is an enumeration? A numbering, a listing. We made a list. Number 1, number 2, number the number after 2, number 4, number 5. There's a list of certain rights. Who are rights given to us by? God. What is the difference between a right and a privilege? I've covered that in previous lectures, so if you don't know, you can go look it up. Yes, sir?
Isn't a right God-given and equivalent something that we can take ourselves?
A right is given by God, a privilege is granted by somebody else. So if the shortcut to the bus stop goes through my backyard, you can apply to me for the privilege of cutting through my backyard to get to the bus stop. And I can rescind that privilege when I see you cutting my flowers or picking my raspberries. And you have just had your privilege rescinded, and you have to go the long way around. That's the difference between a right and a privilege. A right, I can't take away from you. A privilege, if I've given it, I can take it away. So the listing in the Constitution of certain rights that have been given by God shall not. What's the difference between shall and shall not?
It's a done deal, not that you shall be safe, done deal.
Done deal is shall. Shall not means no. No, 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 and no. Think 2-year-old. No. Shall not. No. Shall not be construed. Ooh, there's a fancy word. Construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So construed to deny or disparage, I'm going to let you look those words up for yourself if you're not absolutely certain of their meanings. Go to the Webster's 1828 dictionary. The online version is okay for now, but get a paper copy. Among other things, christianbookstore.com sells them. A very nice reproduction. Yes, sir?
And shall also has a special meaning in the context of law, in common law, that it's restrictive, it's an absolute, as opposed to will not, for example.
Yes, shall is a restrictive and an absolute, yes. And if you are looking for the legal meanings of terms, Blackstone's commentaries, and that is probably better to go online for them because it's a big set, unless you really like libraries of your own, okay? So, construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So, let's go on. What's the purpose of this amendment? Why did they bother with it? Anybody know why they bothered with this particular amendment? Did anybody ever read the preamble to the Bill of Rights? The conventions of a number of the states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. We want plain statements restricting the actions of the federal government in specific areas. In order to address these concerns, 12 amendments were written up after the Constitution was ratified, passed by the House and the Senate, and sent out to the states for ratification, and 10 of them were ratified in very short order, and those became the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. So there was a general fear before the Constitution was ratified that the federal government was going to trample on any right that wasn't specifically written down. So if that's the general fear, what's the purpose of this amendment? No cheating by reading my slide.
It's basically to say that all the rights of government reside in the people, and that we're only listing the specific ones in here that we're giving to temporarily on our instruction to the government. So it's kind of flipping. In most contracts, you list the things in the contract. This is doing the absolute reverse. It's saying, we have everything except for the ones we give you.
Exactly, because the Constitution gives privileges, not rights. It gives privileges to the government. I cannot assign you the job of catching the bat that's flying around if I don't give you the net to catch it with. right? I can't give you the job of sweeping the floor and then say you can't have a broom. So in order to get the federal government to do the jobs that the people in the states were assigning to it, the people in the states had to give some privileges to the government and give them enough power. Give them the broom, give them the net, right, so that they could get the floor swept and the bat caught. If we didn't give it to you specifically, you don't have it. Yes, sir?
No.
Oh, just stretching, reaching for the bat. Gotcha. All right. So this amendment reaffirms that the government has no authority to meddle with the lives of the people except for the very few areas where the Constitution specifically gives that authority to the federal government, such as assigning a uniform value to gold and silver for the purposes of money and currency, in terms of making sure that there are patents and trademarks so that people can protect their intellectual property, so that there would be a uniform system for dealing with bankruptcies in all the states so that you can't cross a state line and skip out on responsibilities. And just about everything that the federal government is allowed to do that it can affect the day-to-day lives of the citizens is listed in Article 1, Section 8. There's a couple other little things scattered in other spots, but most of them are in Article 1, Section 8. If it's not listed there or in the few other places in the Constitution, they have no authority. So now go find out where the federal government has the authority to create the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Food and Drug Administration. Go find it. You can be looking a long time. Don't take my word for it. Go look. So what else does this amendment tell us? As our gentleman in the front row said, there's rights listed in the Constitution, and there's plenty of other ones too, and a bunch of them are listed in the Declaration of Independence, and even that is not a complete listing. There are rights that are not specifically listed, and that the people still have and can exercise those rights that are not specifically listed. And the limitation on the powers of the federal government applies to those rights too. And what it all comes down to is, unless the Constitution says you have authority, federal government, no matter what you want to do in the lives that's going to affect the lives of the people, the answer is keep your grubby paws off. Get out, mama spank, no, no, and no. Yes, sir.
Just an additional comment. People might wonder where the list, the complete list is. It's not in the Constitutional Declaration. The complete list is in the Bible, because that's where our rights come from. They come from God. Read the Bible end to end, and you'll discover all of the rights that God has given to us.
And for the purposes of the recording, Pastor Whitney reminds us that if you want the complete, annotated, and detailed list of all the rights that humans have, read your Bible cover to cover with great attention. And all of these tools for investigation apply to the Bible as well, except that it's harder to find contemporaneous sources. So what are the dangers that attend this amendment? Because there's two sides to every coin. This amendment specifically states certain protections. What dangers come with it? It's almost a given that any government will at some point try to limit the rights of the people or to exert power over the rights of the people, because that is the nature of government, because governments are run by men who are, as we all are, fallen and who grasp for power and control and wealth and other things. And some of them even have good intentions, and a lot of them don't. A federal government will indeed try to limit or exert power. what remedies were written as part of this amendment? I don't remember seeing any. It just says shall not be construed to deny or disparage. So what protections are built in that could be used here? Is this another weakness? This is an area where the people need to be watchdogs. And this is an area then that can be exploited by a government that invents enemies and turmoil and social upheaval to keep people distracted so that they don't know what is being done. There's a big kerfuffle over here, and they don't see that over there, oh, we took that away while you weren't looking. Ha. What are you going to do about it? That's a danger. There is another danger, which is a little more subtle, that privileges can be called rights, and then they can claim to be giving those through government, or can be used to hurt the purpose of the protection of rights. There can be claims that rights are collective instead of individual. Michael Badnarik used to say that you do not have a block of rights that you shave little individual rights off of. Rights are all individual. And there is no such thing as a collective right. And there can be claims that an exercise of rights may demand action by others. Think of this in the invention of, we're going to give them the right to health care. Now, that's not a right. Might not even be a privilege. It's probably more a commodity than anything else. It claims that this is a collective right, and it can demand action by others. If you can demand health care as a right, it means that you can go up to a doctor and demand treatment, enslaving the doctor. Even if there is a promise that later he or she will get some money for it, if you can compel them to treat you, you have enslaved them. The same trick was done with the Obergefell and the homosexual marriage nonsense. They invented a right, and they also misused something that we'll look at later, the due process. I'm sorry, I'm tired too, guys. It's been a long, hot day. The giving full faith and credit to contracts and stuff from other states. So these non-right rights are then used to limit the true rights of citizens. All of a sudden you have to buy health insurance, or you get penalized, tax penalized. They'll call it whatever they need to call it in order to steal from you. But they have no authority in the first place. And they invented a non-existent right in order to do it. And the government control of these rights that are not really rights then leads people who are very purposefully not taught about rights, privileges, or the Constitution to start to think that the government grants rights. And as soon as a document can give you rights, another document can take them away. So government limitations on actual rights can be in complete defiance of other amendments, such as the first or the second. Any hate speech rule, any hate speech law, that's a direct violation of the First Amendment. Any limitation on the right of law-abiding citizens to bear and keep arms is an infringement, and that government limitation is in complete defiance of the actual God-given right of the people. The government invention of non-rights, a right to abortion, health care, to demand obedience from others, the right to same-sex marriage, and the right to mutilate children despite parental objections, and then to remove children from their parents' custody for refusing to surgically and chemically mutilate their own children. The slippery slope is real, and as soon as you get off the very, very tip edge of it, it goes down real fast. Now, keep in mind, the 14th Amendment is also used extensively in this misuse. So let's move on to the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. This is the last one of the 10 amendments that comprise the Bill of Rights. So there are powers that are delegated, that means assigned, right? I delegate to you the chore of sweeping the floor, and I've given you the broom. So I've given you the power to go sweep the floor. The power not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states. So something's been prohibited to the states. What was prohibited to the states? And where would you find it in the Constitution? Anybody know? Bueller? 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 All right, it's in there. In Article 1, Section 10, there are a list of a number of things that the states have agreed that they're going to let the federal government handle, and that they're not going to do it on their own. They're not going to have their own money. They're not going to get into treaties with other nations all by themselves. They're not going to do this, they're not going to do that, they're not going to grant titles of nobility. There's a few of them here and there. They're mostly in Article 1, Section 10, and there might be a couple of others scattered around. All right? Again, go find them. What are the powers that the states say, we're going to give these up? And if you look at them, you will see that they are for one of two purposes. One is for fair dealings between the states, such as we all have the same money. And many of them are for international purposes. The states are sharing their executive powers with the federal government. And so in some areas of executive functions, such as ambassadors, treaties, international jurisdiction items, the states say, okay, feds, you get to do that so that we all act as a whole, but the states, through the Senate, have input and veto power over actions of the federal government, or that's the way it was designed. All right? So the powers not given to the federal government by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the Constitution for the states to do. Everything else is reserved to the states or the people. Education, charity, healthcare, housing, wetlands restrictions, whatever. It's all for the states and the people, not the federal government. So the purpose here, if we think about what the purpose is this same pre-ratification fear that the government was going to trample on any right that wasn't specifically listed unless protections were added. I will also point out that the states are given their power by the citizens, so the states also have privileges that are listed in their constitution. States don't have rights. They're not individuals. They are not created in the image and likeness of God. They do not have rights. They have duties and privileges. This amendment reaffirms the federal government is supposed to keep its grubby paws out of the acts and authorities of the states and of the people, except in the areas specifically listed in the Constitution. And there's a few spots that the states say, we're not going to touch that. It also tells us that there are powers listed in the Constitution. Those are the enumerated powers. Article 1, Section 8, plus some other places. And that there are other powers of government. Some of these are listed in the Declaration of Independence. There's others that are listed in the various state constitutions. And there are powers that are listed that are not specifically listed in these documents, but I bet they're in the Bible under the proper actions of government. And I bet Pastor Whitney could give you some chapters to go investigate. There's the pre-flood Noahide laws, there's the Torah laws, there's the Levitical laws, right? The New Testament laws, there's a bunch of them out there. You can go find them. So there are powers that exist that are not specifically listed, and the states still have, and they can still exercise the ones that are not listed so long as their state constitutions allow it. Those powers may very well be in areas where the federal government is forbidden from acting, such as education. There are still more powers that are limited for the people alone, where even the states can't get their grubby mitts in. And they've got their tendrils everywhere. It's a hydra, right? Because the watchdogs got all distracted and fell asleep. But we have no chance of restoring anything if we don't understand these things. You have to know how it's supposed to work before you can start figuring out where can I act to start to change it back. So, what dangers attend this amendment? Not knowing what in pursuance means. It's not specifically in this amendment, but it's in several other places in the Constitution that refers to the powers of the states and the federal government. What does in pursuance mean? And anyone who wants these slides, my email's going to be at the end. Send me an email. I'll send you a PDF of all the slides so you don't have to waste your camera space taking a bunch of pictures of slides. All right, so what does in pursuance mean? In hot pursuit? No, not quite. Somebody's got to be awake out there. Yes? In accordance with and according to the limitations. Right? Treaties made in pursuance of the Constitution, which means only in areas where the Constitution is granted the authority to act and then properly ratified. So if the Constitution doesn't give the federal government authority to act over the ownership of arms, then they can't subscribe to the UN Small Arms Ban Treaty because they have no authority to limit the ownership of arms by law-abiding citizens. So they have no authority. They could sign it 1,000,000 times over, and as long as the people understand what in pursuance means and what the limitations of federal power in the Constitution are, that treaty would have absolutely no effect because people would just laugh at it. In pursuance. We also, again, the federal government, we know they're going to attempt to encroach on areas reserved for state and individual actions because this is what governments do. You just look at history, this is what governments do. Regular as clockwork, maybe more regular than clockwork. States can also forget that the federal structure is subservient to them in every matter that's internal to the states. They're really good at forgetting this, especially if the federal government dangles federal money in front of them, even though that money originally came from the state that they're giving it back to. Federal grants of money work this way. Give us $1,000, we're putting $600 in our pocket, and we'll send $400 back to you, and then you can go to your constituents and see, I brought $400 in federal funds to the state. That's how federal grant monies work. And the states fall for it every single time because the voting public falls for it too. The states also disregard or forget which areas of government fall under whose jurisdiction, as Pastor Whitney was telling us about yesterday. And they fail to nullify the federal encroachments into the areas reserved for state control. And if you look at those failures to nullify, you will see that overwhelmingly somebody had, here's the federal money. Here it is. All you got to do is agree, and you can have this. You want it. It's like Pavlov's dog, They wave the money, and the states go, right? And they fall into line. So the states collude with the federal government to allow federal takeover for areas that are reserved for state action in return for federal tax dollars, and they ignore that those funds came from the citizens whose rights and interests they're supposed to be protecting. The federal encroachments then grow into other areas that are completely forbidden, areas reserved for state control, state responsibility. The states determine federal overreach, not the feds. And the sheriffs have county-level authority to determine what is and is not constitutional, which is, again, why Pastor Whitney has the whole thing about why your county sheriff is such an important position. They also then will start to encroach into areas reserved for personal control and responsibility. Now we got the 12th Amendment. Everybody ready for this one? This is a long one, so I only put a little piece of it. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president. And then it goes on for like several paragraphs. This replaces sections of Article 2, Section 1. So the first thing you need to know in figuring out what's going on with the 12th Amendment is, what are they replacing and how was that supposed to work and what was the problem? Then you look at how are they trying to address the problem, and is this actually going to work? So very early on, problems cropped up in the Electoral College citizen. Who elects the president? Electors. And Electoral College. Who chooses the electors originally? Who's supposed to choose the electors? State, the state legislatures. Why is it the state legislatures that choose the electors who choose the president? We were just talking about what powers do the states share with the federal government? They share executive powers. So since they are sharing their executive powers, they get to choose the executive they're going to share those powers with. And the mechanism for doing that is the Electoral College. Some of those executive powers are treaties with other nations, military matters that require a national level response, choosing judges to serve in the federal courts, looking at tariffs and customs duties, adjudicating issues that are arising between the states. So if they're going to share that power, they're going to choose who they get to share it with. The original procedure was that the states' legislatures appointed the electors. The state legislatures created the rules for those appointments. The understanding from Vattel and other sources, Locke, etc., was that these electors were supposed to be wise men who were going to be looking for the best executives to hold this highest office of the executive branch, people who were going to look out for and protect the good of the country as a whole. The electors are equal to the number of the senators and representatives in the states. So the lowest number you can have is 3, and the highest number you can have is more than that. Right? So if you have 1 representative and 2 senators, you got 3 Electoral College votes. If you've got 2 senators and 30 representatives, you've got 32 Electoral College votes. All right? Each elector votes for 2 men, and at least one of them has to be a resident of some state that's not the state that those electors are in, because they want the nation as a whole to be looked out for, not just one state's interests. Then they make a list of all those names, and they list the number of votes each of them got. That list is tallied, it's signed, it's certified, it's sealed. It was sent to the seat of government, originally New York and then later on DC. And then the President of the Senate, on a day appointed, opens all of the sealed certified lists in the full presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives. They list each name, they total all the votes that each name gets, and the one with the greatest number of votes is president, if that's a majority of the votes cast. The second greatest number of votes is the vice president. And there's procedures that were listed for dealing with non-majority totals and ties and other things. That's the original procedure. This led to president and vice president with completely opposing political views who worked against each other's agendas and interests. I mean, just think if Trump ended up with Obama as his VP. Wouldn't that make for a smooth functioning executive office?
Imagine if we ended up with Kamala Harris.
Some things will give us all nightmares, thank you. So these problems rapidly became significant enough that within the first 20 years, they said, we gotta fix this. So what stayed the same? They have the same number of electors, the same requirement that one candidate not be resident of the same state as the electors. They have the same thing with all the candidates listing, the number of votes each. They retain these lists signed, certified, transmitted, sealed, and the open counting in public with the senators and the representatives done by the President of the Senate. What changes got proposed then? So instead of voting for a raw list of candidates, the electors voted once for president and another time for vice president. Those lists were kept separate, and each list was sent separately. So here we've got the list of the names and votes for president, and here for vice president. And when they got to the seat of government, they put all the president stuff in one pile and the VP stuff in another. And they went through them as a set. We'll do all the president stuff first, all the vice president stuff next. And again, they had, methods for making sure that you got a president and vice president when they didn't have majority votes and et cetera. You can read the details. So, did this address the problem? Well, yeah, it did. Because the president and vice president were being chosen from different candidate lists, and so they were unlikely to be direct opponents. And no, it was still possible to have a president and a vice president from different parties. It certainly did nothing to ensure any protection against corruption coming in from other avenues, and there were no guidelines issued on how to evaluate candidates. That was completely still left to the states. And maybe they just thought that that was appropriate for the states, but maybe they might have issued guidelines instead of hard and fast rules. So what are the protections that keep this new procedure from being completely derailed? Do, 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 do.
Crickets.
Yeah, they missed that. Oops. So that's a flaw here. That's quite the gaping flaw, in fact. Is it appropriate to give the states completely free rein to decide however they wish? And it is states' prerogative. They're sharing their executive power. And they were certainly very jealous of sharing their power, particularly early in the days of the Republic. And the states had plenty of objections to any limits the feds tried to put on them. So I'm not giving any answer here. I'm asking a question, and it's something that you would want to think about. Is it appropriate? What about political infighting within the states to subvert the intentions of the Constitution, this amendment, and the citizens? Gee, does that maybe sound like something that's been happening? What about safeguards to prevent the legislatures from undue influence from external sources. Is the state level the right place to try to institute those safeguards? And if so, why didn't any state really do anything about that? Is the federal level the right place or not? If we're asking for the best actions from imperfect people, where should the limits be imposed, and what kind of limits or conditions should be put in place, other than voting the idiots out? Right now, we've got corporate interests, other types of special interests, including trade interests, nepotism, bribery, corruption, corruption from inside the USA and corruption from outside the USA. We've got political parties that are subject to both of those two things above. And the last of those, the political parties, especially when you pull in the corporate interest, the other special interests from trade groups and industries and internal and external to the United States special interests, they've really upended the entire procedure for choosing a president. So we've got subversion of freedom given to the states by the political parties. We've got lack of control by the state legislatures over the actions of those parties. So why did the state legislatures allow it? For their own power? For their own control? Did they have orders from the party that promoted them into office? Were they promised money? What else? There's also lack of control by the citizens over the actions of their legislators and legislatures, because they get distracted and don't vote the bums out. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance, but vigilance is disrupted. Lack of education, even if that's on purpose. And the creation of crises, internal, external, economic, panics, bank panics, economic depressions, wars, social upheaval in general, takes the people's attention away from what the crooks are doing on the state legislatures. A couple of additional thoughts here. We must ban our opponents from voting for Trump so we can defend our democracy against the constitutional originalists. That's about the level they're at right now. And this I just got from Zero Hedge that quoted it's not a tweet, is it an X? What do they call it? They still call them tweets? Okay. Right-wing conspiracy theories suddenly acknowledged as true. Biden is senile. Democrats engaged in a massive cover-up for months, if not years. The Biden presidency is run by an oligarchy, and Democrat mega-donors, not primary voters, actually choose the nominee. So this sounds like complete subversion of the process that the 12th Amendment was supposed to streamline, safeguard, and protect. Eternal vigilance. There's my email address. Anybody who wants these slides or the slides from yesterday, send me an email. I forgot to bring the login for that email address with me. So once I get home, I'll send them to you as a PDF. Any questions? Okay.